a podcast by CIPRA.
Il podcast della CIPRA.
Le podcast de la CIPRA.
Der CIPRA Podcast.
CIPRA Podcast.
Interviews, background talks, and voices from all Alpine countries. Listen to this and more in the podcast of the International Commission for the Protection of the Alps, www.cipra.org/podcast.
What is the environmental impact of the Winter Olympics?
These games will use some 2.4 million cubic metres of artificial snow.
A report by Scientists for Global Responsibility said that this year's Winter Olympics will create 930,000 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions.
You just heard some sound bites from the international media about Olympic Winter Games of Milano Cortina 2026. Welcome to the current episode of our CIPRA podcast. My name is Michael Gams. What impact did the Games have on the Italian Alps? What is their legacy for local communities? And what can be learned for the next Winter Games in the French Alps 2030? About this and more, I'm going to talk with my guests today. Francesco Pastorelli, he's director of CIPRA Italy. He followed these Winter Games closely, as he already did when 20 years ago the Games of Torino took place in Italy. Lorraine Mosdale is co-director of CIPRA France in Grenoble. The French Alps will be the host of the next Olympic Winter Games in 2030. She will explain to us why civil society raised a lawsuit because of this, and we'll also talk about the learnings of Milano Cortina. Busch is director of CIPRA Germany. German media widely reported about the environmental downsides of Milano Cortina. Tina can tell us more about this and why Munich wants to apply for Olympic Summer Games. Milano Cortina set out to be the most sustainable games ever. Francesco, you followed the preparations for these games in the course of several years. How sustainable were these games really compared with Torino 20 years ago?
To make an overall assessment, we will have to wait for next few years when we will see if some of the structure built for the Olympics will be dismantled, as happened after Torino 2006, from which no lesson, in my opinion, have been learned by Milano Cortina, or whether they will be kept running through further injection of public money. This was a missed opportunity. Despite the enormous cost and the relevant environmental impact, there will be no real improvement in quality of life for local people. Transport is a clear example. Investing in railways and public transport, which the valley absolutely needs, would have been a forward-looking choice. Instead, resources were directed almost toward road infrastructure. During the Olympics, shuttle bus, for example, to transport visitors ran every 20 minutes. But from today, they will back to their usual timetable with the usual inconvenience for local people who have to travel every day. I think that it will be mainly in the mountain area that will have the most problem managing some of the facility after the Olympic game, as already happened in Torino 2006.
Francesco, what do you think were the biggest failures of these games in terms of climate and environment? You already mentioned some examples, but maybe you have 2 or 3 examples that really stood out in a negative way.
I make a general consideration. In my opinion, everything has its origin from the application dossier that it was not respected. The candidacy dossier really promised about sustainable games with low cost and low environmental impact. But the cost increased from 0 to more than 3.5 billion euros. Existing facilities were meant to be reused. Instead, most of them were completely rebuilt. As for example, the bobsleigh track cost over 120 million, had a devastating impact, and we don't know if it can be used in the next year due to the operating cost. A new cable car, considered as essential for the game, has not completed, while environmental considerations were applied to the organization of the competition. The construction of venues and roads had a hard impact. Land consumption, deforestation, and EV use of water and energy, EV use of concrete and steel. To hide the environmental impact, they tried to keep the organization of the race separate from the construction of the facility, but it's not correct. Obtaining detailed data is impossible so far. We can talk about lack of transparency from the organizer.
Yeah, and exactly in response to this lack of transparency by the organizers, a citizens network called Open Olympics 2026 was formed with 20 partner NGOs, including CIPRA Italy. The network published several reports. What are the most important findings of these reports?
The most important effect is that at least we obtained a web portal listing all the projects and their costs. The network was able to analyze mainly cost-related and aspect because environmental data such as CO2 consumption for each individual project was not available. We were able to verify an increase in cost in general, and we were able to verify that only part of the works were completed before the start of the game. Consider that over 50% will be completed afterward, with the last construction site scheduled for 2043. These are mainly roads, but also they need to complete the construction of the cable car from Apollonia to Socrates for transport tourists. But the event was already done, and even part of the bobsleigh track is waiting to be completed.
Inhabitants of Cortina and Milano were also complaining, and some were even protesting. Why?
The reason that pushed the population from Milan and Cortina to protest, I think, above all, are lack of involvement of the population with decision imposed from above and very little transparency, especially in mountain areas. In Veneto, in Lombardy, part of the population is not satisfied with being on stage for the show, but they would like to see solution for their problem, for problems that have existed for years, such as public service. They are aware that a lot of money has been wasted and problems are not resolved.
So a lot of money has been wasted, you say. This is also what the network Open Olympics makes public. Open Olympics also aims to cooperate with French civil society, as the next Winter Games 2030 will take place in the French Alps. Lorraine, the venues of the Winter Games in 2030 are planned to spread around Nice at the Mediterranean Sea, to Briançon, Haute-Savoie, and Savoie. As in Italy, many existing venues could be used, they say. But CIPRA France is still critical about all this. Why?
First of all, the map of the sites isn't official yet, and it's taking a lot of time to be published. So we can wonder what's going on behind the scenes and what we already know that, for instance, the Département of Savoie doesn't want to be part of the organization for the time being anymore because the budget and the funding of all these projects is not transparent enough, even for a département. And other than that, well, even though you spread out the sites all over the Alps, it doesn't mean that you're going to have snow. I mean, infrastructure doesn't guarantee snow. So you're just spreading out the problem. And some sites, such as Nice or the Southern Alps, have less and less snow, even more so than the Northern Alps. So it's just multiplying the number of artificial snow infrastructure you have to renovate or upgrade to be able to produce enough snow all over the place. And maybe lastly, to answer this first question is, well, it's always the same problem really with infrastructure, is that even if we use existing infrastructure, it exists because it was built, even if it's built now, I mean, the norms and standards will have evolved. And in 2030, maybe it would already be obsolete if the equipment keeps progressing. So it's just also the idea is to not continue always renovating and upgrading and like going forward with all this infrastructure, and to find a way of really reusing the existing infrastructure without having all these projects around, because they say they're reusing existing infrastructure, but there's still projects all around and funding to upgrade and to put them up to the current standards and norms. And maybe the worst would be mobility infrastructure, because it's not really possible actually anymore to build train lines or to build new roads. I mean, the space is very constrained. The SNCF has sold all the land they had, so it's not even possible to imagine building new train tracks. So on this point, we're especially critical because Alpine mobility is complicated. It's complicated in France, and we can't understand how they're promising sustainable mobility and to achieve bringing everyone to all the different races and different events. It doesn't sound technically possible, and they haven't given us proof yet that they're going to manage to do it in a sustainable way.
So infrastructure, one big point, and also sustainable mobility, where the IOC promises things that can't be done in reality. NGOs transparency as well, yeah. NGOs in France pursue a lawsuit against the government concerning the Games 2030. What is the reason for this?
There's several reasons. So one of them would be the financial commitment the state made. We've had a lot of political turmoil over the last years in France with a lot of instability, and decisions are often made by people who aren't in power anymore 2 weeks or 2 months later. So people are very critical of the budget and how the act of asking for the Olympic Games to be in France, how that went on, because it's all on very short notice with people that leave and engage the public budget and the state budget over a long while. And so a figure I have in mind is that, for instance, the French state committed to a 500 million euros guarantee if the event was cancelled, for instance. So there's that type of guarantee that's been signed and committed to, and NGOs are very critical of this use of public money. There's also the fact that, as is very often the case, when you want to organize such an event and you have to manage to build everything on time, well, the policymaker sometimes or very often chooses to adopt a special law to deregulate urban planning and environmental protection because for the needs of this event, environmental law is there for a reason. Whether there be an event of 2 weeks or 2 years or whatever, it's not the aim of an environmental law to be flexible. And to come back to why, and maybe the major point that's been buzzing in the press is a lack of public consultation and the fact that the French population wasn't consulted about these Olympic Games. And so what these NGOs have done is that they went to the Aarhus Convention, which strives to involve the general public in the organization of this type of major projects. The big news is that they were deemed hearable, or in any case, the Aarhus Convention is taking this a step forward after hearing out the NGOs and hearing out the French government. And so we're at this point now where at least it was recognized on some level that this lack of public consultation exists.
So what could be the result of this lawsuit?
It gets very technical after that because the Aarhus Convention is part of the UN and there's a lot of different organs involved that we don't always know about. But from what I've understood is that the French government, they're supposed to prove that they consulted the public. And there's other points too that are under discussion. The fact that there was no overall environmental impact assessment. And what the NGOs are really counting on is the fact that the French government has to present alternative scenarios, I think, depending on the overall environmental impact assessment and what they hear back from the public. And for instance, one of CIPRA France's member, Mountain Wilderness France, is hoping for the event to be cancelled all in all. And so that's still on the table for some of the NGOs, is the cancelling of the event, even though with what I said just before, that would cost a lot to the public finances of France.
So what if the Olympic Winter Games take place in 2030, what could French organizers of these games learn from Italy?
First of all, there's a hidden cost maybe, or that the budget wasn't really realistic maybe in Italy, or was it on purpose or not, I don't know, but that they should pay attention to their budget, which is already exploding. I think the media did maybe a good job or a better job than usually to point out the environmental impacts of the Olympic Games, but I feel like we're still missing out on the social impact. So maybe it's not that positive, but it's looking at what happened in Italy, trying to do better on involving local populations, or at least taking into account the social aspects. Because I feel like we've covered the topic of environmental impacts, and especially concerning ski and ski resorts, like countries who have ski resorts, they should know the environmental impacts. So it's really concerning this major event that has no equivalent in the world, like to do better on the social impact and to collaborate with NGOs or at least networks such as Open Olympics, which is a really good idea.
Yeah, the social impact, one of the big topics here for the future as well. How did you perceive media coverage in France about Milano Cortina? Because you also got some media requests.
We did, and we got media requests from a very large panel of different medias, whether it be environmentally specialized or large audience or regional press. I was positively surprised, and it was interesting. And I feel like it was normal for the media this time to cover the environmental impacts. But I feel that even the march that took place in Milano the first weekend, that wasn't even, hadn't any echo. So, okay, the world news is a bit of a mess right now, but still, there was missing a part of the picture.
And the Alps might face winter games again in 2038. Switzerland is in a privileged dialogue with the International Olympic Committee. After the last 3 bids failed in cantonal referendums, Swiss Olympic changed its tactics. The competitions are to be held in all 4 language regions, and the population will not be able to vote on the matter. Swiss Olympic promises that existing facilities will be used and that the games will be held in a sustainable manner. Something that we also heard about Milano Cortina. Tine, you are from Germany and you hold a degree in sports science and also in environmental and sustainability management. So you know both sides of the coin. Enthusiasm for sports on the one side, but also the challenges for nature and society in the context of big sports events. Can large sports events such as the Olympic Winter Games be sustainable at all?
So one of the things that stuck to me from my sustainability management degree is the trouble with the word sustainable itself, because the term is really not defined anymore or never has been really. So it doesn't have substance, really, the word sustainable. I mean, everybody knows what direction it goes or what is meant, but there is no clear frame. So that's the first problem. And then I think we've heard so many points, so many facts, so many things from Lauren and Francesco already, which makes clear that from my point of view, it's absolutely impossible, no matter how you define the word sustainable. First thing is you have people from all over the world coming to one place. So you have a great impact on mobility, on emissions from flights, from mobility all over the world. A second thing is the infrastructure. But okay, like Swiss claims now not to build any, but we also know it is impossible if you suddenly have to hold so many people in so many competitions in one place. It is almost impossible, especially in the terms or in the regulations of the IOC, because we still stuck to the higher, bigger, further claim. So there is no downscaling. And I think as long as we not start to do any downscaling and adapt to what we have instead of trying to only adapt what is there to the Olympics, especially when it comes to environment and to nature, we don't adapt Olympic Games to nature, we adapt nature to the Olympic Games. And I think that is a really big point in the whole discussion. And this is not yet considered to do it the other way around. We still have regulations, we still have the frame, and in that frame, it is not possible to hold great sustainable Olympic Games. But of course, I mean, what is also mentioned is the enthusiasm for the sports, what it does to people. We've seen so, especially in Italy. I mean, I've been crying in front of the TV at some stage when Lena Dürr missed the first gate in her slalom competition or whatever. There's so much passion, there's so much emotions. That is great for people, and we should find a way to transport and to keep this, but just in a right way, in a way that fits for nature, for society, and for everybody. And in my opinion, that means we have to start downscaling.
We have a position paper about the Olympic Winter Games, and in this position paper, CIPRA is calling for a fundamental reform of the IOC and the framework for planning and holding the Winter Games. It sounds a little bit technical. Francesco, why does the IOC need to reform? What do you think about this?
The IOC must change. Just a suggestion for those preparing to organize next Olympic game, French, Switzerland, or any other country. Make the candidacy dossier binding, because if the dossier binding, as for Milano Cortina, is very well, but after the dossier, the city host change completely, it don't make sense, and CEO don't take a position on this, because the dossier of candidacy from Milan Cortina, I was available to sign the dossier, but after 5 years, we see that the reality was completely different.
Lorraine, what do you think about this? If you think 4 years ahead about the next games, there are again big promises, and the IOC always says, okay, we have new agendas, but we can't, of course, tell a government what they should do or should not do. So this is always a way for the IOC to keep its hands clean somehow.
Sure, but well, it's been complicated, yes, to put our hands also on the conversations and on the documents between the organizers, signed between the organizers and the IOC. So I'm maybe going to focus more on ideas that have been emerging in France, inspiration maybe for new guidelines or for what we could wish for. But it was interesting to see, for instance, that the Alpine Club in France, they published a position that was to remind the Olympic Games that they were in reference to a season. We say the Winter Olympic Games. And so the season comes before the organization, and you have to adapt to the season you do the games in. And if winter conditions aren't there, well, then you're supposed to adapt the Olympic Games to the conditions you have. And I thought that was interesting, because it's true. That would a lot of people were actually shocked by the ski jump in the Olympic Games this year, where you had those people on the side there pushing the real snow away because it was less slippery than the artificial snow. And I think even a ski jumper was hit by one of those blowing machines. So there is the public that's also aligned, like the environmental impacts and the general the people watching the Olympic Games are aligned on that topic, is that it's a Winter Olympic Games, so we're waiting for winter images. And other people in France are also talking about, well, it's always in mountain areas, so we could also celebrate the mountain factor, or the mountain landscape. But in that case, the IOC has to allow us to, or has to enable the evolution of the list of sports, and you have to be able to take off sports and not just add new ones. Because some sports could be stopped, and new ones could be added that are maybe more summer sports, usually like trail or mountain biking, but that you could do on snow, and you can have kind of this merge of whatever winter, spring, autumn, summer sports, but celebrating mountain areas. And the last thing I wanted to add too is that maybe the problem is that it's a country, like everything is linked to countries. And we've also heard those voices emerging that enough with national delegations. We're celebrating sports persons. They're inspiring. That it's an individual performance, except when there's teams, of course. But I've heard a bit of this, maybe in reaction also to the current news in the world and all this nationalism rising, but that there should be less a highlight on the countries, but more on the people performing. And that's the three openings. Maybe I would, if I see the IOC one day face to face, I'd like to suggest maybe those different guidelines to inspire them to change their rules.
Yeah, these are really interesting ideas. Celebrating Mountain Olympic Games, for example. Tina, also Munich, wants to apply for the Olympic Games. It doesn't end. But Munich wants to apply for the Summer Games, which are, of course, way larger than the Winter Games. One could think this is not relevant for the Alps because it's in Munich, it's in a big city. Is this the case, or what's your point of view on this?
No, definitely not, because Munich is so close to the Alps, within an hour's with the public transport drive. So when it comes to accommodation, or it might even be a venue there if it comes to mountain biking, we don't know yet. But for sure, you will have the traffic in the Alps, you will have more people there, so it will definitely have an impact. And then what we talked about now the last couple of minutes is the whole structure of the IOC. And in this case, the IOC, as far as I know, tries to keep the costs for the applications down. And what happens in Germany now is they have 4 places where they could be held. They all write a concept. They all have an application, which costs a lot of money. In Munich, it's been 8 million so far, only for having an inner German application.
Thank you for this resume concerning Olympic Games in Germany. Thank you, Christine, thank you, Lorraine, and thank you, Francesco, for these insights on the Olympic Winter Games. Check out also our articles about Milano Cortina on our website, CIPRA.org. There you can find also our position paper with our claims for a reform of the Olympic Winter Games and the International Olympic Committee. One thing is for sure. The Alps cannot afford another decade of broken promises. They are more than just a playground for the Olympics. My name is Michael Gams, and I hope you tune in also for the next episode of our podcast. Cheers and have a nice day.
A podcast by CIPRA.
Il podcast della CIPRA.
Le podcast de la CIPRA.
Der CIPRA Podcast.
CIPRA Podcast.
Interviews, background talks, and voices from all Alpine countries. Listen to this and more in the podcast of the International Commission for the Protection of the Alps, www.cipra.org/podcast.